That's how it's gonna be, a little test tube.
It's most likely to be a highly infectious virus.
Guy steps out of Times Square station, smashes it on the sidewalk.
Welcome to the Zero Indent Review, a show dedicated to handcrafted studies of genre fiction. I'm author DC McNeil, and I'm joined as always by Patrick from A Method to the Madness, a man who can seemingly fix anything mechanical just with a hammer and a wrench.
I operate on video game logic in real life.
You've got like plus 25 into repair.
Yes.
I love it. And we're joined as always by Darth, a man still deciding if he looks better with a beard or without. That's a bit from the film and also real life.
Yep. I had shaved it off, and then we started this, and I was like, oh, if I'm going to be filming stuff, I should be a little bit scruffy. So I've been letting it grow.
We truly are a podcast with varying degrees of facial hair. You know, the sort of, you know, those like the like evolution of man. We're like the evolution of facial hair. Do you know what I mean? It's like Patrick, Darth, David. You know, that's kind of that's not going to be our poster for this season, but it could be.
Well, you had that one mock-up that was really good.
Yeah,
the facial hair.
That's right. I'll put those on screen right now. Those were fun. Very good. Yeah, I've just been getting into ever since I got the tablet, I've been drawing a lot. I've been writing it. I've read so many books. I've had that thing for about a month, and I think I've read 10 books or something like that. Like, I'm just, yeah. Well, because you drag them on there on the desktop app, and then I'm reading a book, Patrick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. It's becoming more and more of an appealing idea to me as well. Getting like a Kindle, because every time I travel, I bring like 3 books with me, and it takes up half my carry-on. Yeah.
Well, this is it. And like, I'm on the bus, bam, I'm reading a book. I'm waiting for the bus, I'm still reading a book. I'm always reading a book now. Which, you know, only sort of increases my antisocial tendencies. But hey, that's, you know, that is what it is.
But before, assuming that you just threw up on screen the drawings that you did of the 3 of us, assuming that's been up there.
Here they are again.
Okay, so I wanted to make the disclaimer that, like, the day you sent that to us was the day that I shaved off my beard, and I wasn't doing that to be antagonistic. I know that you would have thought that.
It did feel that way. Because it felt like what happened was I sent those images, and then about an hour later, you posted your like retirement video, and I was like, the motherfucker shaved. I was devastated. I was like, well, that serves me right. I don't know. You say non-antagonistic, but then I see the actions that you took. So it's like, who do we believe? Anywho, this is our first episode of our kind of new unit. We are talking, of course, about post-apocalypse. And this is kind of, for me, a pretty topic of study that's pretty close to my heart. I've been, you know, working on studying the post-apocalyptic genre since I wrapped up the Sherlock book, so for about 18 months to 2 years now. And we are, of course, brought to you by the Zero Indent Patreon subscribers who help make the shows and articles that shape Zero Indent. You can find out more at zeroindent.com or support us at patreon.com/zeroindent. I wanted to start. This week we are talking, of course, about the world, the flesh, and the devil. This is a kind of classic staple of the genre. 1959, written by Randall McDougall and directed by Randall McDougall. I realize it's pronounced McDougal if you're American, but you know, pasta and pasta, what are you going to do? I wanted to before we get into the film itself, I wanted to get your guys' kind of general vibe on the genre. I know Darth kind of jumped the gun and accidentally announced the unit before we'd announced the unit, which is very funny to me.
I started to ask you when I was filming that, and I was like, no, he's talked about it. He had to have.
I'd only on Patreon.
Sorry.
But it's fun. I just thought it was funny. A reveal that no one was surprised by, like, at all. Yeah, like, what's your guys' experience with the genre? Are there any standout works in the genre that you're like, hey, that's like an iconic one for me? Yeah, what's your kind of relationship, I guess, before we get into the film itself?
I guess I've never really thought about it that deeply until you got on that train of the post-apocalypse genre. What My my first relationship to post-apocalypse might be like I Am Legend with Will Smith.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
yeah.
staple.
Um yeah. And then of course like The Walking Dead, like that came out when I was like just entering high school and I sort of like grew up with that as well.
Mhm.
Um and yeah, I mean it's this film was really interesting because I identified a lot of those apocalypse tropes that I saw in the movies and TV shows that I grew up with.
It's crazy how fully
Um
formed some of them are as well. Where it's like, oh, this
yeah.
hasn't changed at all in like 100 years,
Yeah, yeah.
basically.
And like it really made me think about like why those tropes are the way they are and like what ideas they evoke and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, like yeah, this was such an educational film for me.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah. But yeah, I mean, apocalypse just generally, I think, yeah, it's like it's I don't know, it's such a fascinating genre, like so intriguing, you know. Um, and I think it's very broad as well. Like you know, like I've recently come across the thought that like Star Wars is post-apocalyptic. Um, you know, I mean, this is a bit more explicit, but Dune is also post-apocalyptic. Um, it's like post-apocalyptic kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. There and then you know there are like postmodern takes like that, but then there are um more straightforward takes in modern times of the apocalypse genre that just like crank the nuance up to you know like 11 like the Last of Us the video game part 1 stuff like that. There's just like so much in this genre that you can do and it's so versatile and it's always like just so interesting if you do it right.
Mhm.
um yeah.
Yeah, I think I Am Legend's such a good pull for this film in particular. Like, there's the zombie film is like weirdly present in this film in a way that's like it's like present in the abstract, where it's like all of the pieces are here, they just haven't put zombies in it yet. Like it's so weird. Um, and yeah, I mean the zombie moment that comes with The Walking Dead, that you know that obviously sort of I guess you would argue was then replaced by like the vampire moment that was then replaced by like the young adult dystopian moment. But yeah, interesting that you referenced The Last of Us, because the discourse around the post-apocalypse is such an interesting thing to try and contend with, because I think a lot of modern critics have this problem where they imagine that there's the wave of the zombie media coming off the back of The Walking Dead is like that's like the emergent genre, which is just like not true. Post-apocalypse has been around since like the 20s, in its at least contemporary aesthetics. It gets exacerbated by the nuclear arms race, and then obviously in our modern time, just everything feeling like it's going wrong. And then the Fallout games and The Last of Us and all of these things are all just riffing off the same source material, which is like ostensibly After London, Jeffrey's novel. And we'll talk, I guess, throughout the unit about the different sub genres of the apocalypse story, because obviously this story in particular is really a very quick collapse story, and then a survivor story, slash almost restoration, kind of maybe almost. So yeah, keen to unpack some of that. And as you say, Pat, if this was educational, I'm really interested to see like which bits stuck out to you, because this is a film where like 5 things happen, and I love films like that where you're like, this is it's a lot of people in rooms arguing with each other about the same stuff. Yeah, Darth, what about you? What's your relationship aside from being absolutely jazzed to do this? Ever since I pitched it like a year ago.
Ironically, as Patrick was talking, I was trying to have a little bit of self-realization about why I love uh, this genre so much, because I've always very much loved anything post-apocalyptic. Even like as bad as like the Resident Evil series is, any crappy like B film that's post-apocalypse, I will happily watch it. Um, and then I realized like I grew up when I was elementary school and younger, like ancient Egypt and archaeology. That was one of my favorite topics. And it's that aspect of the post-apocalypse that I find so fascinating. Like the Shannara Chronicles. the ruins of the old world. That's why I love it, because like when you see the bits of history and you're seeing how that history that we're living in led to this potential future, like that's what's so interesting to me. um anyway, all of that said, yes, I absolutely love this genre, and some bits of it are more my favorite than others. Like zombies are fun, but also then I can't sleep for a couple days. So it's like not my absolute preference. I love the take that the Shannara whole like series did, where it was a lot more magical and they brought in the dwarves and all this stuff, but it's still like heavily tied to our real world, at least physically. And then this film was very interesting because I almost never go back and watch old movies, because it like almost like hurts, because the the field has just changed and grown so much. And particularly with this one, the sound design was the number one thing that stood out to me. Like, it blew my mind how much, like how the craft of Foley, meaning when you add in sounds after the movie is filmed and you're trying to emulate, this is what a falling rock sounded like. This is what, a man walking on concrete would have sounded like. All of that has just developed so much over the past, 70 years since this was made. And anyway, I'll like, story aside, I was just blown away from looking at how they did the matte paintings for all the backgrounds, and like physically how they shot this film back in 56, 59, whenever it was that it was filmed.
Yeah, it's like an impossible film that it's one of my favorite things about this film is you watch it and you're like I try to sort of imagine myself as like a Mad Men side character going to the cinema at like 2 p.m. on a Thursday to watch this, and just my mind would have been melted. Like, it looks so good, and the Blu-ray remaster that we watched looks so incredible, and like it just dead ass looks like New York City 97% of the time. It looks like they just emptied out the city. There's about 3 shots where you can clearly see it's a matte because of the way that the Blu-ray raw upscaling works, but like, goddamn, it's a good looking film. Yeah, and the sound design. I guess the sound design has to be good because there's so few sounds that they really have to think about what they're gonna do with the audio to make this place feel empty. And it's a film very concerned with silence and sound and darkness and light. Like, those are obviously a lot of the big kind of ideas tossed around. Yeah, I guess to paint in some of the context, just to say the thing out loud. So when we talk about post-apocalypse, we're talking about stories concerned with the end of civilization, or the end of a civilization, or the end of civilizations, usually focused on the survivors of the collapse, or in some cases, like After London, this sort of ecology of collapse, right? So like After London's a really weird book in that the first half is literally just like an ecological recounting of like what would happen in London if all the people disappeared, and then the second half is an actual story. That was kind of the way that the genre started. And then it sort of blossomed and evolved. We talked a little bit about the zombie story. We'll probably talk a lot about the disease and the pandemic stories as we get further into the unit. When we talk a little bit about Emily St. John Mandel and her kind of expertise that she brings to the modern version of this genre. And then, of course, with this film, we'll be talking about sort of the nuclear sort of apocalypse that we will become very interested in later on in this unit when we talk a little bit about some stories that concern themselves with that. I think there's probably a few things that I want to get into that I won't sort of talk too much about here that will evolve naturally as we go. We have a bunch of terms that are a glossary. We'll check the terms up at zeroindent.com if you want to go grab the meaning of the terms as we use them. I'll try and identify and relitigate the meaning of some of the less common ones, but just to sort of place some of these out there. We're talking a lot about heterotpias, materialism, epistemology, probably a lot about materialism. But in particular with this film, heterotopia is probably the centermost one that we will end up talking about. For those who don't know the term, which I'm assuming everyone except me, heterotopias are basically, it's the idea of if you have a utopia and you have sort of a dystopia, heterotopias are worlds within worlds, right? So they are worlds within worlds that are both similar to their surroundings, but also contrast or upset the continuity of their surroundings. Foucault often describes the heterotopia as a place where few or none of the members of a given space have any like intelligible connection to one another, right? They're worlds within worlds that produce contrast and friction. But the crucial thing for Foucault that makes them heterotopias is that the people contained within them, like they don't have, you can't look at it and be like, yes, this is why everyone is here. So like examples would be like freighter ships, cemeteries, bars, brothels, prisons, like airplanes, things like that. So while there might be some like material reason why people are in the space, the reason why the people are in the space together is not the same, right? When you get on a plane, if you're going for like a work trip for a couple days, and the person sitting next to you is flying back home from a holiday, while you're on the plane for the same reason, the space becomes heterotopic because you're in the same space, but there's no intelligible reason why you're in the same space together. The same with cemeteries, bars, brothels, etc. You get the idea.
Yeah, especially with brothels, I wanted to point that out because like all of my friends, they'll want to go for the women, and I'm going for the free buffet.
Exactly.
Different.
Yeah, he's eating the breakfast buffet. I'm there for the beer. Like we're all there for different reasons. You know what I mean?
Okay, I've never heard of this term. What came to my mind was The Hateful Eight by Tarantino.
Great
Is that
example.
a heterotopia?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it's sort of it's a way that you argue for spaces. Like I don't necessarily think anything is or isn't. It's just like things can become heterotopic. It's really common when talking about stories that take place under fascism or some kind of state control, where these places tend to engender friction against the ruling class or the state itself, because in coming together for no intelligible reason, you produce entropy that allows emergent properties to exist, right? Two people that otherwise would never be in the same space happen to be sitting next to each other, happen to start a conversation. It very much the Hateful Eight's a good example. And for us and our purposes, right, talking about post-apocalypse stories, and this film in particular, is kind of by definition, most like science fiction, science fantasy, and almost all post-apocalypse stories are often heterotopic in that because the world ends, right, they are stories that take place in worlds that are radically indifferent to their inhabitants, and they sort of necessarily force people into contact with each other who otherwise wouldn't be, because survivors group together, or a group of survivors clashes with another group of survivors, things like that. And they're deeply antagonistic, which tends to produce heterotopias.
Yeah, it creates like really unique interpersonal relationships that otherwise wouldn't exist because of the setting. Yeah.
Yes. And not to use another big word straight away, but we talk about that being produced by the decay of like epistemological frameworks, which is an impossible word to pronounce. But epistemology basically is just the theory of knowledge, right? Which is that all knowledge is a product of sense memory. It's a big piece of philosophy that's used to challenge empiricism and rationalism, right? This idea that when you're a teenager, if you're a teenage boy, if you're a straight teenage boy, if you're a straight privileged teenage boy, you tend to develop this sense of like, well, if logic and facts is actually the most important thing, and it takes a long time for that to wear off, we start to realize like, actually all knowledge is kind of produced by sense memory. It is driven by perspective. Feelings are as important as facts sometimes. The way that heuristic decision making happens has very little to do with facts and is often very much vibes based, which is how most humans function. If we were all fact machines, we'd all lose our fucking minds anytime we had to make a decision. But that decay of the epistemological frameworks is what produces heterotopias, because there's no more electricity because no one knows how to like fix the generator anymore, right? That's like knowledge is lost. The sense memory of that knowledge is lost. The internet disappears. You can't look stuff up on Wikipedia anymore. And so just by definition, post-apocalypse stories tend to produce heterotopias. Also, think about stuff like stories set in space or on spaceships, right? Star Trek. Every season of Star Trek is ostensibly in some way a space that contains multiple heterotopias, right? They go to the Darth. What's the? Is it forward? Oh God. The recreation deck in Star Trek Next Generation. 10 forward. Is that right?
The holodeck.
No. The bar.
No.
It's 10 forward, right?
Sure.
Sure, why not? It actually doesn't matter. That's a great example where it's like in this work environment under this federation, there's a bar that you can go to, but like people are all there for different reasons. We'll talk a little bit about the different subtypes of heterotopias. For us, most relevantly, Foucault's crisis heterotopia is the most important, which is, as Foucault describes it, reserved for individuals who are in relation to society and to the human environment in which they live in a state of crisis. He talks about this as places where coming of age or transformation occurs. The examples he provides are hotels, ships, boarding schools, classrooms, playgrounds, things like that. And of course, crisis heterotopia is the definition of a post-apocalypse story. So again, zeroindent.com if you want to sort of grab a list of those terms. And I'll probably start to write a bit more about each of these as we go. And I'll keep adding to that across the length of this unit. So that'll be a great resource if you want to sort of keep up and play along. So we will jump in and talk about the film in just a second. I did want to call out something from my deep consumption of novels of late. So I've been reading a bunch of Emily St. John Mandel in preparation for this. St. John Mandel, for those who don't know, is a Canadian author. She's a contemporary Canadian author with an expertise in pandemics, science fiction, and collapse. She, of course, famously wrote Station 11, which we will be talking about after this. We'll be talking about the TV adaptation of the Station 11 novel. And then, of course, Glass Hotel and Sea of Tranquility, both of which deal quite heavily with the idea of pandemics and sort of the end of civilization. Sea of Tranquility, in particular. I just want to give you this piece, which I think is probably relevant to a lot of what we'll be talking about, particularly in our current moment, where it sort of feels like the world is ending, but it kind of has always felt that way. She has this great section in Sea of Tranquility where a character is on a book tour promoting her novel, and her novel deals with a pandemic that wipes out the world. It's like a sort of similar to Station 11, but obviously fictionalized within the world. And she's trying to explain to this audience of people during this lecture why we have such an interest in post-apocalyptic fiction. And I think St. John Mandel nails it, where she says, quote, "My point is, there's always something I think as a species. We have a desire to believe that we're living at the climax of the story. It's kind of narcissism. We want to believe that we're uniquely important, that we're living at the end of history, that now, after all these millennia of false alarms, now is finally the worst that it's ever been, that finally we have reached the end of the world." And this is sort of the thesis she is to drive the novel forward and to drive this character's suppositions forward. I think relevant for us because a lot of these stories are about individuals dealing with the collapse. St. John Mandel talks a lot about the end of the world as the opportunity for heroism. And you could look at a text like The Last of Us and see it as the opposite. You know, it's an opportunity for great villainy and great personal indulgence and great narcissism. We see that in a character like Joel. As much as we like Joel, he's undeniably a bad guy, doing things for selfish reasons. I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that as we talk through the show. But that's all the groundwork that I wanted to lay out, You
know what's interesting is the book I've been reading is called Millennium by Tom Holland. And it's about how in the year around... Yeah, not Spider-Man. This is an old British
Tom Holland. Here's my book. I'll give it a read.
I got really into history.
I got well into history. Zendaya got me reading.
Yes, exactly that. It's about the turn of the century from the 10th to the 11th, so year 1000, and how everyone around that time thought the world was going to end because of like text from St. Augustine, who was like, it's like the Antichrist will come, in the 10th century kind of thing. And it's about how how everyone, like all the kings in Western Europe, and all the bishops and anyone who was anyone, had this sense of urgency and purpose that they needed to get their shit together, get Christendom together, whatever, like repent, do what you needed to do, and get moving, because essentially the world was going to end. Christ was going to come back, and all this stuff, and just the enormous like cause and effect that had from the big political players all having this like feeling that the world was going to end, and like how that like really irrevocably like reshaped Europe in the long run.
Talk about
Mm.
talk about like a schism that like truly just upset everything. That is, yeah, that's fascinating. What was the title of the book again, Pat?
Millennium.
Millennium by little Tom Holland.
By Tom Holland. It's one of the best books I've read in a while. It's so good.
Damn. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
I've got an interesting little side quest to so her quote that you just said was something about how like we feel like we're living in the best time currently, or like everyone feels like they're living in the best time.
The most sort of uniquely important time.
So tangential to that, something that I've seen with the political movement in America is so many people are like, we need to go back to the good old days. And I don't know who it was that pointed this out. I think it was in the book The Fourth Turning that I'm still working my way through. But they went back and looked at like newspaper articles and all this kind of stuff where they had interviewed people, 20, 40, 60 years ago, and they said the same thing. Like back in the 1940s, people were saying, I wish things could go back to the way they used to be. Life used to be so much easier. It's gotten way too hard. And every generation is saying the same thing. And I don't know who it was that pointed it out, that what everyone is feeling is they're remembering what it was like to be a child when nothing was your responsibility. You didn't have all of these problems. You just had to go to school and do your homework and go out and play. And so when you're grown up and you're feeling like everything is so hard, I wish I could go back to life was better. Life was better 20, 30 years ago. It's just because you were a kid, but we don't contextualize it that way. So it was interesting when you said that quote, and then that immediately was what jumped into my head. Was that so many people naturally have this feeling like we are living, the older we get, the worse we perceive things, because we're remembering how easy everything was in our earliest days.
Yeah. I mean, that's also indelible to the fascist project as well. The idea of like a golden past that if we just return to it, I mean, that's where you get the restoration fantasy evolving out of. In some ways, is this idea that like, yeah, it's like nostalgic for a time that didn't actually exist. And what they mean by like, I wish things, what you're talking about is like how people actually feel. The way that they weaponize that is what they mean is like, man, I wish you could go back to when things were great, when there were no brown people. You know what I mean? Like that's really where that project ends up extending to. And obviously that becomes a big part of the Third Reich and the project. Off the back of the Weimar Republic is this question of, well, we need to restore Germany to when it was once great. We need to make Germany great again. None of these guys have any original ideas of their own, by the way. They're all just cribbing off of Mein Kampf, but that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the Flesh and the Devil, because I'm sure we want to put a lot of this stuff into praxis. So Patrick, when you're ready, if you can navigate it, because the document's a little bit different than the previous one. Page 6 is where we have the summary for The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, 1959, written and directed by Randall McDougall. When you're ready, Patrick, let's hear that good old summary.
Is it actually his name, the Randall? Because you've written Renaud, and that
I don't
also
know
is a name.
how you're supposed to say
Okay.
it, because I saw it's
Just wanna pay
Renaud,
respect,
but then I saw it was Randall written somewhere else, and then I just saw somewhere else. So I don't know.
All right, R. McDougall.
McDougall.
Alrighty. Ralph Burton, a mine inspector, is trapped during a visit to a Pennsylvania coal mine. After 5 days of waiting for rescue, Ralph notices the rescue party slowing down, and then they stop altogether. Refusing to give up, Ralph dares a cave-in as he digs his way to the surface. But Ralph's celebration is in vain. The mining site is completely abandoned. The radios are dead, the phone lines are dead. The world is at war, poisoning each other with radiation, the papers claim. Ralph explores empty town streets, eventually steals a Chrysler and drives toward New York City. He discovers a world gone empty. Cars fill every street corner and every bridge. No one left to pilot the metal skeletons. He finds New York equally abandoned. Ralph spirals as he empties a revolver into the air and accuses the world of staring at him. At long last, he finds running electricity in the New York Broadcasting Service head offices, only to confirm the world has been killed by radioactive sodium isotopes released into the atmosphere. He mourns for the world one last time. A woman follows Ralph as he plunders the city and sets up in a motel. Proceeding with the end of the world, Ralph makes the best of it. He resurrects the motel, builds a home for himself with electricity, and even starts writing music again. The woman, Sarah, finally meets Ralph. They fall into a friendship after a fashion. Ralph fixes the phones and the radio with the goal of contacting other survivors. But after Sarah suggests she could move into his building, he shuts down. Ralph absolutely butchers cutting Sarah's hair in an awkward moment of class and race disparity. The next day, someone replies to Ralph's radio signal. Ralph throws a cleaver, uncomfortable and sweet.
A cleaver. Ralph throws a cleaver.
Clever. I was like,
I did not remember that.
There's a deleted scene.
Ralph throws a clever, uncomfortable, and sweet party for Sarah's birthday. Ben, a traveler, arrives from the Southern Hemisphere, the only survivor of the Southern Hemisphere, he claims. With this, Ralph distances himself further. Ben circles Sarah. Ben eventually crosses the line and becomes convinced that if he does not kill Ralph, he will never have Sarah. And well, he's maybe right. More on that in a moment. Ben brings a pistol to Ralph's apartment with designs on hunting Ralph. World War IV begins as Ben tries to kill Ralph with a rifle. Ralph flees into the enemy city, hunted. Ralph refuses to fight, and ultimately Ralph and Sarah hold hands and walk home with Ben. The world, the flesh, and the devil, alone in the vacant street of a dead city in a dead world.
Very good, Patrick. Now,
that's very hard to say. Ralph with a rifle.
Ralph with a rifle. Ralph is a hard word because a lot of words have R's in them, and it just is real tongue twister the whole time. I did not name the character though, so that's not really on me. Now, obviously, the biggest pull of this film was Harry Belafonte, obviously playing Ralph. Absolutely at the height of his powers when they cast him in this film. As you would have gathered from just watching the film, if you have no context for who Belafonte is, singer, songwriter, musician, actor, general all-star at the time, and brings such a charm and likability and wit to his character. You know, he's so magnetic on screen for the sort of the first hour. And I think it's a really clever way that he delivers his performance where, you know, obviously when Ben arrives, that completely changes. And his attitude completely changes. But even just this opening, you know, he's in this mine, doing this inspection, and, you know, all the stuff collapses and he's like futzing around a bit and he's sort of like freaking out. And then he has like the most like Darth moment where he goes, wait a minute, the telephone. And he goes and tries the phone. And he has this little jive where he says like, I'd like to submit a complaint to the president of the company. Something short, just 30 or 40,000 words. You know, he's sitting there, he's stuck there for 5 days. You know, there's the digging, and he starts to like do a little song to the digging, the rhythm of the digging. It's really, really charming. You know, he's like, I don't like it here. You wouldn't like it. Nobody likes it here. It's just like really, immediately likable character, right? Doing a job that sucks, gets trapped by his job that sucks, and he's funny and he can sing. I don't know, like, how does this opening work for you guys? What sticks out to you with this sequence where he gets trapped and then sort of emerges? And I guess the plot mechanism is he being trapped in the mine is what prevents him from getting irradiated by the isotopes that are released into the atmosphere, right? And apparently this is like a real thing. Like I did some Googling after this, and this is like a real way that you can avoid radiation, basically, is by like collapsing in a mine after yourself. And it turns out they do this in an episode of Jericho. So like, I don't know, this is apparently I personally wouldn't try it as my first port of call, but apparently it's a real thing that does work. But yeah.
I mean, is that not what like the nuclear fallout shelters are designed to imitate? Like
basically
sealing
yeah.
yourself off underground. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think Ralph is pretty magnetic. The actor is amazing. He has an interesting heritage also. I looked him up. He has Jamaican, Jewish, and Irish ancestry, which is an interesting mix.
Yeah, a bit of everything.
Yeah. But yeah, the things that stuck out to me was like his little joke about like, oh, just like 40 or 50,000 words. Like that's such an old timey like movie quip. It's like, yeah, I'm watching a 50s film.
Hell yeah, right.
Yeah. And then yeah, like I didn't know anything about what this film's about, and obviously post-apocalypse. So when he came out into an empty city, the immediate connotation was like, yeah, wartime, nuclear war, just like, just after World War II. And I imagine that's what was probably going through a lot of people's heads in, contemporary people at the time.
Yeah, I mean, they've spent literally like the last, 5, 6, 7 years, getting told on TV like, hey, when the sirens go off, get under your desk at school, right? Like this is a generation that is preoccupied with these concerns. When the storm comes out.
I think 4 years earlier, Stalin built their first nuclear weapon, so
right,
very much on people's minds, probably.
Yeah, and I think the film is obviously, you can read this film as incredibly allegorical should you choose to do that. I think that we will talk about whether that makes sense in a modern context. Like just a Sarah, white woman, 21, Ralph, sort of 30-ish, maybe a little bit older, black man, and then Ben, this white guy from the Southern Hemisphere. It's all kind of there if you want to take it. But I think what's interesting about like the way that he emerges is, I don't know that I immediately assumed nuclear war until he starts reading the newspapers. And then my follow-up thought, and my thought the whole time until he sets up his motel, is like, where are all the bodies? Like, because in a film that would be made today, this would be mummified skeletons would be fucking everywhere. But actually, I think it's even more disastrously tense that it's just empty. Like, and they convey the horror of the loss with the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars that are just like filling the Lincoln Tunnel, and like, absolutely backed up across the George Washington Bridge. Like they convey the scale of the loss without having to show you a single corpse, which is super interesting.
And that's what made me wonder if this whole thing was like the precursor to I Am Legend, because he keeps talking about like, I feel your eyes, I feel you watching me when he's walking through New York. And that was the number one thing that I struggled with the entire film, is that there were never any bodies anywhere. And the only thing that made sense to me is that they were all zombies and they all had to stay inside and hide, just like I Am Legend, which would also explain why he always feels like there's somebody watching him. None of that was true, according to the newspaper, where it just said that people fled the city. But then he read that in the paper and he went to the city where the paper said no people were, so he should have gone to the countryside if he was trying to find the people. Either way, all stuff that, like you said, I think would be dealt with way differently in a modern era film. and it may have just been at the time like it was you can't show bodies like that. It's just not
Yeah.
acceptable.
You just can't do that on film. But I also think that it lends the credence to the idea that this film might be. So there's a theory, and I think that you can read the film this way. There's a theory that this is sort of a rapture situation, and these are the only 3 people left on the world because of this rapture. That is kind of lent some credence by the idea that, like, he talks about, like, when he goes to the church and he just completely breaks down by the notion of, like, there's absolutely no bodies, and it's this story about temptation in some ways. If you read it that way, I disagree with that reading, but, like, you can kind of make that argument that it could also be something like that, where, all the people get raptured and they're just left. They're in hell, which is, like, what's left, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, before he finds out, like, finds the recording, I wrote down, we don't see the end of the world. The cause and process is mysterious. So if they stuck with that, then yeah, that could have been a cool little thing.
You could also going with the rapture idea. You could also argue that there's a representative of, like, one person left in each country. If if Ralph represented, like, South America or something like that, and then Sarah was North America, and then they hear one French guy, right? And then this guy came from somewhere else. So now you've got, like, one person per country. You could read it that way, maybe.
The rapture left enough for a UN to convene.
I mean, you joke, Pat, but, like, this film ends opposite the UN headquarters. So,
Oh,
I don't know.
there you go.
I don't know. Maybe film theory.
This is one of the many tropes I picked up, but the trend of starting mid-apocalypse, that's very I've seen that a lot. Someone waking up and the apocalypse has already happened. In this case, he's trapped and then he walks out into an apocalypse. But yeah.
Yeah, so this is probably a good time to talk about the collapse story versus the survivor story. So the collapse story is, like, a story concerned with the moment when the world is, like, unraveling, right? And it is adjacent to, but not necessarily implicated by, the disaster film, right? But you can think of, like, a typical disaster film as, like, emblematic of a collapse type story, where it's characters surviving the collapse, versus a survivor story, which is usually concerned with, like, a narrow group of survivors who are sort of thrown together by circumstance, dealing with some existential threat after the collapse, right? In this story's case, right, it's a survivor story in that they have to deal with each other. And actually, the existential threat ends up being Ben, which is kind of interesting. But yes, it is curious that trope is just fully formed. And will just resurface again with Rick from The Walking Dead. Like, fully formed, it's here. It's like, I think the difference might be such a great scene where, and I thought this was the most 50s thing ever, when he does make it out, and he sort of has this realization. The first 3 things he does is he shaves, puts on a suit, and steals a car. I was like, brother, it's the end of the world. I don't know the suit was necessary.
But that's another apocalypse trope, though. Like, in the end of the world, you just, like, you're free to just whatever, loot anything you want. Get all the consumer goods you ever wanted.
It super feels like they actually just had Belafonte throw a tire through a window. Like, nothing about that scene made me feel like that was, like, movie glass. It really just felt like they had him break the window and then drive the car through it. I was like, doesn't seem safe. Yeah, it's very good.
I had a thought about the whether or not you're going into the story, you're seeing the collapse, or you're a character who's coming in after the collapse has happened. And I think, like, with how they did Fallout, and she is the viewer. When she gets up to the surface, she is seeing everything for the first time, just like the viewer is seeing everything for the first time. And I think that's why that type of story is more appealing than just coming into it where the characters are all used to everything. They've been living in this their whole lives, nothing is abnormal. Because then that sense of awe, that sense of newness is lost on the audience. And that's something that I've always struggled with because I love seeing the collapse portion of it. But then I'm like, okay, I want to see like 100 years in the future now. So like I want to see all these big time skips, but if you don't do it a certain way, then you lose that sense of wonder is not the right word, but sense of wonder at this new world that you're in.
Yeah, or material quality, right? It feels real.
That's why The Last of Us is goated, because you get the best of both worlds in that. You get the opening scene where you witness the collapse happen, and then it cuts to 20 years later, and you get all the interesting like back projection of how people have survived.
Man, y'all are gonna love Station 11. The the other story to put in conversation with this is obviously A Canticle for Leibowitz, right? That's a story that it's a fix-up novel, but that jumps forward several hundred years within the end of the world, and does a lot with that. I think that's probably something worth calling out here, which is something that and I'm gonna try my best to pronounce this person's name, but it's Annabien Capel-Beischer in their 2011 paper. They describe a lot of the questions of the post-apocalypse as questions of regulation of life, and how sustained regulation of life is and how in flux it is, which usually determines at what point the story takes place. So Beischer makes this argument that like if regulation of life is very consistent and is like kind of pre-configured by the time the story starts, so like The Last of Us Part 2, for example, then you're typically going to be having a survivor story where some new threat emerges, versus if the regulation of life is in flux and very difficult or not yet established, you're probably in a collapse story, right? Beischer uses that as like an indicator to help identify the subgenre of a post-apocalypse story. But to Darth's point, I also think that I think it's very difficult to do both, and it's part of why Emily St. John Mandel as an author is so lauded for her ability to write these collapse stories, because she can do both and seamlessly move between them. You'll see that when we watch the Station 11 adaptation, and hopefully that's going to draw into focus like why sometimes that really works in some stories, and then sometimes in others, in particular The Walking Dead, right, when they try to do flashbacks to before like the end of the world throughout that show, it just always feels kind of wrong. Like, it's very hard to articulate, but they do it a bunch of times. Like, you get a few with Rick, you get one with Michonne. I think throughout the course of the first 4 seasons, you kind of get one with each of your key characters that are going to sustain throughout the sort of length of the program, and they always feel kind of wrong or like off in some way. Versus, other stories like Pat was alluding to, where you get the really impactful beginning of The Last of Us Part 1, and then you sort of flash forward, and then you get backfilled in, Joel's life as those stories go on. But yeah, I think it's cool this story gets to do both, where you get to see the horror of the realization as we kind of already set out. He goes to New York City looking for people, and there's just cars everywhere. And I have a question here, which is, how did they get this plate photography? And Darth, it sounds like you looked into this, but the plate photography they have of like the George Washington Bridge full of cars, and the Lincoln Tunnel. Like, the Lincoln Tunnel is like iconic in films. Like, there's like an iconic location, and it's packed with cars. And I was like, is it miniatures? No, like that's too many miniatures. Do you know how they did some of these insane shot stuff?
So I was pulling this from the early Star Wars films, and assuming that the process had not really changed that much in the 20 years between those, but they had like a pane of glass, and they would paint like hand paint or draw on the glass, and that's where they would put like 500 stormtroopers. And then they would only have like 3 real stormtroopers there, as Vader and Sidious are like walking down, and everything else there is a painting on glass that's just kind of like plopped in front of the lens or something. And so I was assuming that they had done that the same way here, and like everything was a matte painting, and literally it's just someone painted it. Whether or not that's how they did it, I haven't actually researched, but that would be my best guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would make sense to me. I mean, it just looks so freaking good, man. Like, you know, and he's sort of, because he's trying to figure out how to get into New York because everyone's tried to flee New York, which they've abandoned their cars. And he ends up taking this little dinghy across the river, which I thought was really clever. It's just like a little tiny little boat.
It's a really weird. I'm sure this is like just an American thing, but whenever we're watching a movie now, we're like, okay, did they take out the Twin Towers or did they leave them in? Based on when is the movie supposed to take place? Was it, before or after the towers were destroyed? So that they like are going back to some movies and like editing out the towers because they weren't supposed to be there, blah, blah, blah. So I'm watching and I'm like, the skyline doesn't look right. And then I turned to Dad and I was like, wait a minute. When were they built? And the Twin Towers were built after this movie was made. So like them not being there was right because they didn't exist yet, which kind of blew my mind how old this movie is.
Damn.
I
did. That's actually wild to think about. God,
right?
Yeah, this it's like prehistory. That's crazy. Yeah, I mean,
the history starts from 9/11.
History ends at JFK's assassination and starts with Reaganomics. So it lasts for about 10 years. It's not very long. But yeah, he kind of drives across, and like something that I was really struck by that they do in this film that I was like, this is just 28 Days Later. 28 Days Later is just this, is like the way that they convey emptiness is with like newspapers being everywhere. I don't know why, but that is such an effective piece of imagery to just have papers blowing in the wind, like to signal that it's empty. I don't know. It really does convey that for some. I don't know why.
I guess newspapers are just like rubbish, so it's just like there's rubbish everywhere. Yeah, it's like desolate and abandoned.
Right.
Well, there was a big push, I want to say in like the, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, where it was like, be proud of your community. If you see litter, pick it up. This is your town. Help, so, and I wonder if that has been, especially for like older people, I wonder if that's always been kind of a thing. So now if you see like litter blowing around, then obviously there's no people, because if there were people, they would clean it up because it's, that's part of their job as part of the community.
Right. Civic pride is what you're arguing.
Yeah, which doesn't exist anymore. Now we just have litter.
Newspapers are doubly effective because it conveys the abandoned nature of it, but also a character can pick it up and see, what was going on on the days before the apocalypse.
It's true. Yeah, it's actually a really good utility. Plus, like, it has that eerie thing of like, they printed all of these newspapers, but there's no one left to read them. You know what I mean? Makes you think.
So I want to go back a bit to when you were talking about this being a survivor story, because I want to argue wholeheartedly against that definition. And I don't know what definition it may fall under, but it's much more of an emotional survival story than a physical survival story, which is what pretty much all other films in this genre that I've seen are about. They're like, where do we get food? How do we keep warm? How do we do this? How do we do that? This guy is exactly my granddad. Like, he rewired he did so much. He built our stairs, he rewired our garage, he did all of this stuff, and that's what Ralph knows how to do. He never has a problem surviving. He never struggles at all to survive. It's entirely the emotional trauma of being alone. And to me, this does not at all fit. I know like I Am Legend deals with that a lot, but he also seems to deal a lot more with survive. Like he seems to like he's like getting gas, and I don't know. It seems like he is struggling to survive in a way that Ralph never struggles. If that makes any sense.
It does. I want to be clear. When we say survivor story, we're not talking about a survival story. Survivor with an OR. And it's about survivors dealing with an existential threat, right? And this Ralph is dealing with the existential threat of being alone, and then he's in fact dealing with the existential threat of being close with Sarah, right? In a story where someone is like, sorry, you just mentioned a film. What was your example there, Darth? It's gone from my brain.
I Am Legend?
In I Am Legend, the existential threat there is obviously the vampires, and like you say, surviving and food and all that stuff. They're still existential threats. It's just one is physical and one is, you know, emotional or mental or you know, philosophical, or in I Am Legend's case, you know, spiritual in the book a little bit. But so yeah, it's the definition there is not about whether it's about survival. It's about whether it focuses on the survivor and them facing some kind of existential threat, or survivors facing an existential threat. So your argument there completely makes sense and is sort of an argument for why we would sort of classify it as a survivor story, I think. Because he is dealing with being alone. I think you could imagine a different version of this where they add another 30 minutes and he has that initial struggle of like food and water and all that stuff. And I think it's a lesser film for that too. So yeah, I completely agree with you, what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm not saying that any story has to have that stuff, which is ironic because at first I'm like, where are the bodies? This isn't realistic. But then also I'm like, he doesn't have trouble surviving that isn't realistic. But like at this point, it's only been like a few days to a few weeks or whatever. There's still food that he could get. He's got plenty of food. He's got a lifetime supply of food in cans from all of these apartments that were just left abandoned. So like, I totally get how like this is not an issue and how this story is entirely a mental, you know, social, he's missing the social connection. And that's one of the bigger things that struck me as I was watching it was how different this survival struggle was, because it was almost entirely internal versus an external force. And one interesting thing to look back on is how early that concept was introduced, because you mentioned the phone when he's trapped in the mine and he never hears a person's voice. From the moment that the cave-in happens, he's cut off from humanity, and they can hear him, but he cannot hear them via the phone. He only knows they're there because they tap on the pipe when he asks them to. So his loss of the other starts way before, like days before everyone even dies.
That's really well observed, yeah.
And I like the way the apocalypse genre goes after this is, you know, with The Walking Dead, it's a lot more of the physical survivor story, right? Resources, food and water, that kind of thing. And so, you know, when Will Smith's I Am Legend comes out, it's quite subversive, no? Like the going back to this kind of story about you know, emotional need being the main like survivor element of the apocalypse story.
Yeah. And like The Walking Dead eventually gets there, obviously, right? Like once they have the gang set up stakes in Alexandria, it very much becomes a show about social concerns, and then eventually about politics in a way that it's really ill-equipped to handle. And then it wraps all the way back around to being about emotion again, and then they try and make it about politics at the end, and it's real messy.
Bro, you're just the best at like doing these little drive-bys in The Walking Dead. Like you've got it nailed down so good.
It's in the chamber, Pat. Listen, one day I'll finish that book. Today's not that day. Yeah.
Another one is I just started The Last of Us season 2, and like it starts off as a like emotional thing about, you know, temperamental teenage girl, and that is kind of framed as being like more of a struggle than trying to survive in Zombieland.
Yeah,
you know,
dude.
Which I
Do you
thought
remember
was
being
like
a teenager?
super fascinating.
Being a teenager sucks. Your brain is wrong. You can't think straight. You're an idiot, but you think you know everything. It's the worst.
Yeah, I think my experience was way different because I just practiced trombone.
Yeah, I was doing a lot more.
I had a different.
I was doing a lot more misogyny than you were probably. Teenage years were bad for me. Bad for everyone around me. Yes, I do think that that's a really interesting observation at this juncture, like early on, because I think we will end up having to talk about a lot of these stories as, you know, are they concerned with literal survival or are they concerned with like other existential sort of questions? I want to foreground the idea of Station 11 when we cover that next, because that's a story that sort of has the best or in some ways the worst of both worlds, where it can be about both of those things because of the way that it deals with time. And I think that there's always a third actor in any post-apocalypse story, right? You've got your characters, you've got the world, and you have time. And time is you're either on the clock against time, trying to find resources so you can survive, or time is what moves the plot forward because it's like the only constant from before, you know, the epistemological collapse, right? It's like the only constant is like time keeps moving and you need to keep surviving. And like the cost of existence becomes much higher and much harder to achieve and to satisfy in some post-apocalypse stories. And then, but then a character like Ralph, he's just able to figure it out, right? He's able to do all this stuff with electricity. He is just so capable of these things. And, you know, we'll talk as we get to Ben and we talk through Sarah. Like, I don't think it's an accident that this film has the black character in this role. He's very capable. He ends up taking on the responsibility of maintaining the literal infrastructure that makes society go. And there's a lot we can kind of unpack there as we get to it. But it does
Speedruns surviving.
Yeah,
like
dude.
When he immediately starts talking to the mannequins. It's like, bro, the gets the mania just down quick.
He starts it and gets it out of his system real quick. He's like, let's just do it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go crazy for one time and then I'll be fine.
Day 2, already start talking to dolls.
I love when he's like talking mad shit at the guy that keeps smiling at him. And he's like, you've laughed at me for one too many times, my friend. And he throws him out the window. It's so good.
So I have been debating, like, if I wanted to admit this or not. I'm just going to go out and admit it, and we'll see if this means I'm like super not racist, because it took me until the dude literally Ralph puts out his hand and shows it to her and says, "I'm a black man," and I was like, "What? You are?" Like, it was a full hour into the movie before I knew.
It is a bit harder to tell in black and white, I think. And he's not that dark also, yeah.
Yeah. And so I kept thinking he was, Puerto Rican or something, like a mix. But I kept seeing him as he's just a white dude. But the story does completely change when I'm like, oh, yeah, like this is, back in the 50s and having a black man and a white woman. That's completely different than what I was thinking it was.
It's funny that that's just cultural context. Like, if you were alive back then, you'd be like, well, it's Harry Belafonte. I know who that is. Like, it's just engendered in the fact that he was famous at the time. But yes, that is funny. He is for sure, he is for sure a black man. And
yeah, well, it was funny. As soon as Dad saw him, he was like, "Oh, that's what's his name," and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way. And he was like, they're pretending that he's black for this, because his mixed race, like he was like Puerto Rican and all the whatever, all those other things that Patrick had talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But yeah, I did think that was interesting that they like cast someone who sort of looked the part, but not like a deep, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think there's a couple of things, right? Belafonte brings a star power, which is getting bums in seats, right? That's like a big part of it. And also, like, I don't want to, litigate or get too deeply into like the variations of like the Black experience. But I think that for a character like Ralph, played by Belafonte, it adds a level of realism isn't right, representation to his character, that people were talking about him like this, right? They were othering him even from the people who look like him and sound like him and are in the same industry as him, because of, you know, he's a little bit lighter, and as Pat was saying, you know, mixed heritage. So it doesn't surprise me that that might have been in the zeitgeist. Yeah, that's for someone else to think more deeply about.
I wrote down that this must have been quite the countercultural film when it came out, which is, you know, you'd love to see it kind of thing. Like if it was really popular and, you know, had this like kind of controversial, you know, plot. Yeah, that's just it's always cool and interesting to think about, like how, you know, this was received back at the time, and therefore like it kind of gives you an insight into you know, where people's heads were at the time. You know, you know history through these big events, you know, like MLK, stuff like that. But, you know, this movies that released that were big and had these kind of themes in it, you know, you start to realize like, oh, okay, like, you know, this these ideas were cooking for a long time, you know, about like segregation and interracial relationships and stuff like that. And, you know, people, there was an audience for it. There was a big audience for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, from memory, with the reception of the film, I think there was two kind of polarizing reactions, right? One of them was like exactly what you just said, Pat, just like, hey, like, it's good representation, it's a good start. And the other was like, doesn't really go far enough. Like, they didn't actually give us an interracial couple on screen. Like, what was the point of all this commentary if they don't do the thing? Like, so, you know, pretty typical, right? There's like the people who haven't seen this before, they're like, hey, this is like really a good thing to do. And then there's people who are obviously, you know, this would be what? This is 59, 5 or 6 years into the civil rights movement. There would be people and critics who are like, this is not enough. Like, you need to keep moving the line forward and do more. Is that math right? 50? Yeah, that sounds about right. About 5 or 6 years. But yeah, it's funny how Ralph really struggles to articulate the reason why there's this distance between him and Sarah. And it's almost like he feels like him having to articulate it is like a problem. Like, because he's like, well, she should know what the problem here is. And she at one point accuses him of pride, which I think is like a really interesting way to understand her character, misunderstanding the problem between them. I think that's something we'll talk about when we kind of dig into that relationship in a minute here. But yeah, Darth, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was gonna dig into the relationship, but
I want to talk about one thing first.
yeah,
which is the scene where Ralph goes to the broadcast center, and he's listening to the final like radio calls, and it's the operator talking to a bunch of people, and then like one by one, all the other people on the line go quiet. It's like either, you know, flee or die. And you just haul on Belafonte's face as you hear the guy be like, hello, is anyone there? It's like that. He's just like, that hit me like a ton of bricks. That was like a really devastatingly emotional scene. And Belafonte's just completely shattered by it. Like, he's stony faced and he's crying. I thought that was fantastic. Really, really evocative. And a very simple way to communicate the horror of this without having to show bloody violence or people's skin being, you know, eaten away by radiation. Yeah, seeing his reaction to that and the way that audio was choreographed. To Duff's point before, the audio design and the Foley, I thought that was just brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, fine. Let's talk about the relationship. So Ralph starts talking to these freaking mannequins. It's very funny. We love to see dudes being guys. And he rigs up the generator to the motel, and brings the whole thing back to life. He does a little dance with the shadow, which is very funny. Sarah's kind of watching all of this, being like, "Is this guy cracked?" And he ends up getting into an argument with the mannequin, where he has like a really poignant moment where he's like, you're always laughing at me. Do you know what it's like to be sick in your heart from loneliness? Oh, you think that's funny?" And then he chucks the mannequin off the balcony, and Sarah, this woman, like, she kind of runs out screaming because she thinks that he's killed himself. And they have this initially quite charged exchange, but she explains that she's been following him for weeks and it's made her feel better just knowing that he's like alive. She was worried that he'd killed himself. And it sort of resolves with, he asks her what day of the week it is, or what the date is, and then what day of the week. And she says it's Sunday, and he gives this little grin and he goes, "Yeah, it felt like a Sunday." Really charming. And so they fall into this pattern, right? Just to sort of set this up. Ralph is trying to fix the phones and the radios, calling out to people. And he and Sarah have this kind of friendship that is weirdly intimate, but also platonic, but also not platonic. And the question of their existence up until a little bit later when Ben arrives is, what are they to each other now that the world's over? What kind of existing social frameworks still exist? And the key thing here, obviously, being that Sarah is like a 21-year-old white woman, and Ralph is, a 30-year-old black man. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics. I think the fight in particular after the haircut is where some of that gets really made into text. But yeah, that's me setting it up. Darth, did you want to jump into it?
Okay. So, the synopsis of the characters says that Ben is the bigot, and the way that everything actually plays out, to me, is what Patrick was saying about how like everyone was just like so steeped. I don't want to say like indoctrinated, but everyone was so used to this, you know, African Americans don't have the same rights. They're, they don't mix with the white people. You can't date the white people, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, it wasn't Ben who was the bigot. It was Ralph himself. And all of his interactions, like one of the first things, when she is like, "Hey, can I move in with you?" And he sounds like he's joking when he says, "What would the neighbors think?" But that's also literally the problem, is he's still stuck in that phase of, you can't do this. It's the social construct that we cannot cross this barrier because of all of the quote unquote neighbors. Even though they don't exist anymore, he's still stuck in that mindset. And the entire rest of the film is him being stuck in the bigoted mindset of, we are black and I am black and she is white and we cannot cross this boundary. Whereas Ben doesn't seem to have those same, he's like, yeah, he's your friend, that's fine. And he'll, Ben will eventually say a few things like towards the end, that is like, oh, he's supposed to be a bigoted character, but the stuff that Ralph says and the way that he acts about himself seems to me as way more bigoted than the character that was supposed to be written as the bigoted character.
Well, he has these hang-ups from the pre-apocalypse about the social paradigms of, segregated US in the 50s. But like that's a if anything, that's a trauma response, right? Like he cannot let go of that world before the apocalypse that was just like so unfair and toxic and brutal, that he just cannot let it go, and he still carries it with him. Like that's not, I wouldn't say that's like him being bigoted. That's just like, it's like a trauma response. He just like withdraws into himself, and just like he can't be disappointed or let down if he if he doesn't expect anything good to come out of that, to come out of this new social paradigm.
Right. And like if every second of your existence is mediated by your race, the world ending doesn't immediately remove all of those tools and mechanisms that you had to develop to survive and to fit in and to not be too black and to be black enough and to be the right kind of black and to not be the wrong kind of black at the wrong time. He has that line later where he says, and I think it's a really poignant scene that illustrates this really well, which is it's where Sarah asks him to cut her hair, which is a transcendently intimate and upsetting scene, where he initially starts and it's fine. And he sort of, I wouldn't call it a panic attack because I don't think it's like that fully formed, but he kind of collapses as this haircut is happening. He's like halfway through it and he's like attacking her hair basically as he starts to sort of increasingly flip out. And he has this, she's starting to get upset because he's angry and he's like, well, what did you expect? Like cut it yourself. Like I have like, and then he goes like, I cut my own hair. I bring two mirrors together, right? Like it's not just the racial disparity between them, it's the class disparity between them that gets drawn into contrast here. And she calls him like an upstanding guy, like, he's a fine enough guy. And he's getting increasingly frustrated, and he sort of puts this forward as his thesis, which is, why should the world fall down to prove I'm what I am, and there's nothing wrong with what I am? Look, we leave it the way it is, and I won't mention it again, okay? Now, he won't mention it again, that won't stop him from acting on it again. But yes, I think that is... that's kind of the point of why he can't let it go, or that's the thrust of why he can't let it go. Is like, he's always been this good guy who's really capable, who's presumably really good at his job, who's funny, who's charming, who's charismatic, and it takes the entire world ending for that to be acceptable and for him to be more than his blackness and to be more than his race. It's a pretty devastating experience for Ralph, that like this is what it takes for him to be like a full person in the eyes of someone like Sarah, right? And we talked about heterotopias before, and the heterotopia that they form in coming together is in friction and opposition with the previous version of reality, where they would never have had a reason to interact. And that is part of what heterotopias do, is they deeply challenge the people that are within them to interact and participate with people that they have no intelligible reason to participate and interact with. And that can produce new frictions and new anxieties and new conflicts,
Which is quite interesting when you compare it to today's apocalypse stories, because today the modern apocalypse story is so explicitly like a colorblind world, because it's sort of like acknowledging that like in pre-apocalypse society, those were big issues, but now that the world has ended, our priorities are so different that you don't even have time to like be discriminatory kind of thing. But like this story is like very much like about no, people don't just let that go kind of thing. Like it's still there, still rattling around.
Yeah, I think the closest you get in like a modern story would be like you'd have like one group of survivors who are like, hick, like, racists or whatever.
Yeah,
that's
like
their one
neo-Nazis.
character. Yeah, that's like their
survivors, yeah.
skinheads. It's like their one character note.
Yeah. Does that happen in The Walking Dead? I feel like that kind of sounds familiar. I feel like
does that happen in The Walking Dead?
Oh, isn't like Merle's group kind of like that before he like joins back up with the
no, the governor, it's just Merle. The governor's not racist by any means, or anything like that.
Oh, was he with the governor's crew?
Yeah, okay, so yes. It's been a while. Yeah, he joins up with the governor, and that's eventually what gets him killed.
Okay.
Yeah. Great show. But yeah, I anyway, I think the other thing that I want to call out there, just to put in context with this, is the line that he brings back that she says is when she's like, when she says, "Hey, like maybe like I could move into your building," and he gets really like weird about it. She has this line when she says, "I'm free, white, and 21. I'll do what I please." And later on, he's like, "You said that like it was nothing to you. Like you don't understand like how much that hurt me when you say shit like that. Like you don't even understand how much your world isn't influenced by the things that have completely defined mine." Um, and despite all of this, he still has a warmth to her. They still have something between them. Yeah, we'll talk about the birthday party in a second because that's kind of the next big thing. But yes, sorry, that was a lot of us responding to the idea that you put forward there, Darth. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I've just been kind of thinking about, and I'd never researched what like what the directors and writers and everyone was thinking when they went into this project. But just kind of me thinking about like the time frame in which it was created, it seemed very much like this was, the white man shows up and assumes, and the audience would assume that the white man now needs to marry the white woman. And but then when you're looking at like the way that everything plays out, and like we were just talking about it, but it's the black guy who's stuck in that old mindset and won't let himself have that relationship. um all of that stuff I very much liked. So I definitely don't want to come across as saying like I didn't enjoy it. It was completely backwards to what I was expecting the story to actually be. um and I also thought it was interesting that Sarah just jumps right into it, and there was absolutely no hesitation and no bigotry on her part. That's not to say that, those people don't exist, but especially for, as long ago as this was made, I did find that interesting.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, right? Because the other thing that we get with the Ben, Ralph, Sarah dynamic is the age differences, right? Ben is older than both of them. I would say he's like 40-ish. Yeah, he's got a wife and 2 kids. It seems like roughly his age. Belafonte's closer to 30, and then obviously you've got Sarah who's 20. So like it also makes a lot of like, and I hate talking about characters like they have to be logical, but it makes conceptual logical sense. Like a young person would be more progressive, right? Like it feels like it's congruous with someone that age, who is young and is talking and thinking about these things. Mad Men is a lot about this stuff, right? It thinks a lot about the ways that characters like Peggy have to deal with this stuff as like a young person who's progressive but is working in like a non-progressive industry. The way that she deals with both being a woman and deals with blackness and the civil rights movement is like a big part of that character eventually. Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't quite clocked that Sarah just is fine with it from the start. It felt so naturalistic to me that I didn't even notice it as a detail, but that's a really interesting point.
Well, her comment about like I'm young. What did you say? Young.
I'm young, white, and I'm 20. I'm young, white, and 21. I'll do what I please.
Yeah, like that's the kind of thing where she has probably never thought about like the injustices of segregation that deeply, right? But and it's just she is born into this world, she understands its rules, but at the same time, like she has no reason at all to think that like black people are inferior or to hate on black people. They live amongst her, every day, kind of thing. But the rules of the world are what they are, kind of thing. And I think that comment is like sort of an expression of how she views the pre-apocalypse.
Yeah, which is sort of Ralph's point, right? Because he's like, it's that she doesn't even think about it. She doesn't even think about it, and it's every part of his life is mediated through race. For her, it's just not even a consideration.
There is another reading that I don't think that we've touched on, and it's the line where she says, "I've been watching you for weeks." And you could also interpret that as she has seen his personality over those period of weeks where he's dancing with his shadow, he's singing the songs that he made up. You know, you could say that she may have started out, this is totally conjecture, but we could say she started out, maybe she was more towards the bigoted side, but she saw him and saw, oh, this is a wholesome, good dude. And then that's why she has no problem when she actually meets him, because she already knows him. Like I said, all of that
makes sense. Like that is like a really good reading to me. It's like, yeah, she gets familiar with him across that length of time, sees that he's a charming guy. That completely makes sense as well. A little creepy, but makes sense. And feels
I had that
right.
same thought. I was like, how often do you see like the pretty blonde girl who's the stalker?
I know. Again, cool little, like, nice little subversions. But no, I mean, like, yeah, that does read really well to me. And also makes a lot more sense why she's so willing so early to be a bit more forward with him, in a way that he finds quite confronting. It makes sense. She's had more time to think about this than he has. Yeah. So, we should talk about the two big plot things that'll get us to Ben. The big realization Sarah has right after she says, I'm free, white, and 21, I'll do what I please. She's sort of saying this as she's like a little bit manic. And then, this is after their first fight, and then she has this crashing realization that she'll never get married.
I was just about to bring that up. Because she's standing next to a dude, but she's like, I can't marry that dude.
Yeah. And he says, as long as... And so I want to make two things really explicit. Throughout the length of this picture, Ralph is both takes responsibility for Sarah's physical and emotional well-being at various times, but is always in charge of her physical well-being, in that he maintains the infrastructure and the electricity that keeps them going. She, of course, cooks and contributes, and it's a two-way street. But without him, she doesn't have power. She doesn't have this setup. So I just want to make that explicit. And he says, as long as we're alive, the world is still alive. We're monuments, you and me. And then he does this little smile. He goes, you're the best. A little damp right now, but a very nice monument. Just thought it was really sweet. He has a real charming way of making her feel better. And this film does a really good job of naturalistic dialogue where these characters don't start arguments and then storm out on each other. They start arguments, stay in the same room, and then keep talking. I think it avoids being melodrama by doing that. Where, after that first fight, I can't remember if it's this one or if it's the next fight, but I think he's doing dishes or something. And they're around each other for another couple minutes, and then they start talking again. And it very much feels a lot more realistic than I think, or a lot more grounded than I think a lot of the dramas at the time, where they were much more heightened and it's people slamming doors and walking out on each other, versus this much more sensitive understanding of what relationships can look like, whether that be platonic or romantic or somewhere in between.
I will say a lot of the arguments they had, even some of the just natural dialogue, but definitely a lot of the arguments, I was like, this is such old school arguing. Like the things that they would argue about, and I'm like, really? End of the world, and we're arguing about that. But it's also like a lot of it was very much old. I don't know if trope is the right word for. But the dishes scene was something else I wanted to mention, because I adored that, where he's at the sink and he's scraping the food, and then he just picks all the plates up and chunks them out the window. I love that so much. And she's like, why did you do that? And he's like, I already did the math. We have 70 years of plates.
It's so good. That is a very Darth coded scene. I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. Because I would just throw them out, but you're the type of guy that's like, I did the math to check that I could do that sustainably.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick actually cleans the plates. You know what I mean? That's the the pyramid.
I go down and pick them up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm also the guy that would not have checked the water to see if it worked.
That's pretty funny. Yeah,
So,
yeah. For those who didn't watch, in this argument where he puts the plates out the window, he's like, well, I'm not gonna waste water. Like I have to lug it all the way up the stairs. And she gives him this look like he's the dumbest guy in the world. And then she just turns the tap on. She's like, the water tower's on the roof. Like I assumed you knew that. So and then she gets snippy with him and she's like, so you don't know everything. And then it kind of, spirals into like another argument as she goes to leave, and that's where you get the I'm free and 21, I'll do what I please, and that little scene. Oh, so the next thing then I have is the birthday party, and then we can talk about Ben and the way this all wraps up. So probably a couple things here to call out is so he throws her this birthday. I don't know how to describe this. Pat, can you try and set up this birthday party for me? Because there's a lot going on.
It was the sweetest thing ever.
It's
I
so
adored it.
sweet. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, first of all, he creates like a fake newspaper for her, as if like, oh, it's like the event of tonight in New York. It's Sarah Crandall's birthday.
All of New York
And
invited.
so yeah. So she drives her car down to like somewhere fancy, and he's acting like a valet for her. And his role is he's like, he's internalized a lot of like, just surviving as a black man in 50s America. He's being like a valet / like chauffeur for her. And she's this is like probably something a rhythm, a relationship that's familiar to her, and like she's sort of like very easily, effortlessly going along with it, kind of thing. But yeah, he's set up like a table with candles and nice food for her, or he's like cooked her a nice meal. And yeah, they just have like a waiter. They're doing a bit of role play as if it's like a waiter and a guest of honor kind of thing. But it quickly turns sour because, again, like Ralph is still hung up on the pre-apocalypse social paradigms, and Sarah is still a bit oblivious to what she's saying and like how it makes Ralph feel and stuff like that. Also, this is another trope that will be used a lot in the future apocalypse shows and movies, is that like the survivors try to play pretend as the world was before.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
yeah. He presses a vinyl of himself playing music. It's just so touching. But yeah, she has this line where she leaves. Yeah, because she invites him to sit down. It's like the moment that things turn sour. And he's like, oh no, like, we don't sit with the guest of honor. And she says something like, I have pride too, as she kind of leaves after she's become upset. Which I think, again, to your point, Pat, is her just not really understanding why what she's saying is hurting him, and why it's sort of maintaining the distance between them in some way. But yes, it's just like a absolutely lovely, like such a thoughtful scene. He he finds her this big diamond that, because of course it's the end of the world, like you can just grab whatever you want now. Yeah, I thought it was really fun. The vinyl thing was just so touching, and it's him playing his music, and he's got like simulated crowd sounds, but because he's not an audio engineer, it's cut really poorly. I thought that stuff was really charming, just detail wise.
And this was one of the scenes where the like the old style acting and filmmaking like really stuck out to me. Because when he refuses to sit with her, because he says, we don't sit with the customers. We're not allowed to sit with the customers. And she like literally sticks her chin up in the air and refuses to look at him. And he brings out a cake that he's got made, and it's got it. We don't see what it is. He's got something funny like written on it. And he's like happily showing it to her, and she refuses to look at it. And she's got her chin up in the air. And I'm like, that is so old school, like so old school. And then like 30 seconds of that goes by, and she's like, I'm ruining everything, aren't I? And then she tries to calm down a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, because she
the whole thing
starts
was
to tear up a little bit as she's doing this act of like having her head up in the air. Yeah.
That's right. You and I are not alone in the world anymore. Civilization's back.
Does it really make that much difference?
You know it makes a difference, Miss Crandall.
I have pride too, you know. Good night, Ralph.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It also feels it it feels like I like the way that she goes from pretending to be like obstinate to just being upset, and they kind of blend into each other. I think it's a really great bit of acting from her in this scene where she still can't figure out why this keeps going wrong, right? There's like there's an element of confusion to why she's upset. Yeah, and I want to know what's on that cake, y'all. I bet that was good.
Yeah.
I bet that's a good gag. Yeah.
And also, for anyone who needs to hear this, if you are in a similar situation, talk. Just tell the person. All you gotta do, ladies, tell the gentleman why you're upset, because we're stupid and we don't know.
I see. Which?
Yeah, go for it, David.
No, I was gonna do a bit. You go.
I feel like the rhythm and cadence of respectable, lively conversation of this period in this culture is so specific. It's about being witty and responding with a quip kind of thing, keeping things jovial and lively. But then when something awkward happens, people you don't know how to don't know where to go from there, and so Sarah just breaks down. She's like I don't know how to respond to what Ralph just said to me about completely just breaking the play acting, or rather going way too far into it kind of thing. It was quite realistic to me. I thought her reaction. She's just she really just doesn't know how to respond, and so she just goes silent. And I was like, yeah, that's feels like a true to life response.
Well, I also think there's a reading here of her finally understanding that this play acting he's doing is him presenting for her the respectability politics of what presumably every black man in this type of job is doing. And that might be the first time she's ever thought about the fact that them pretending and doing these things is respectability politics, which is an act of suffocating their own culture and assimilation. I think there's also a reading of this is the first time she maybe realizes this interaction she's had with these waiters and these staff throughout her entire life. That is part of the fact that they're acting like this. That is also part of the systematic racism and appropriation. I think that's also part of how you could read her reaction there, is she literally for the first time is realizing oh shit, I didn't even think about the fact that them pretending to be like this is part of that, the kind of overall suppression of race and their personhood and things like that. So I think that's also in the mix.
Yeah. And she might be, I don't know, maybe she's feeling an immense amount of guilt at that moment, which is why she sort of directs the blame at herself by saying, oh, I'm ruining everything, aren't I? Yeah.
Okay, well, should we talk about Ben and how this all kind of wraps up and accelerates? So this stranger, Ben, arrives, and he's on a boat, and he's a white guy, and he immediately, from the second he wakes up, he's making eyes at Sarah. They're having a little joke about him trimming his beard, And he was right. He does look way better with a beard. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for this man. Sometimes some men just don't look good without beards, and this man is one of them.
I mean, I disagree. I thought he looked better without the beard.
Really?
That's just me. Yeah.
I was,
He-
I
he
was waiting
has a
for a
good,
hint. I was waiting for a hint, Darth.
He had like the classic like what's the that detective from the Big Sleep and those films? He has like that kind of face, that rugged detective.
He does look like a PI for sure. Yeah. Bogart is who you're thinking of. Yeah. So this is like the big plot thing, right? So and something that's really important to note with Ben is that he has these little affectations he does. Like he's like when he's trying to be funny, he'll do these little like voices. He explains like, oh, he's like, I used to be an idealist. He tells her that he tells Sarah that he was married with 2 kids. And there's something about him that I wouldn't say it feels fake because that's not what the film is trying to convey, but there's something produced about Ben in a way that there isn't with Ralph. When, Ralph is being charming or funny, it feels very warm and authentic. When Ben is being funny, it feels like a guy trying to be charming and funny, if that makes sense, instead of being charming and funny.
It's like the small talk they do on Mad Men, when characters meet each other and shake hands and stuff.
Yeah. It's like meeting a client, and it's all sort of glad handing, and like it's a little bit fake, and yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I kept waiting for a reveal that he was like a Nazi white supremacist or something. Like he had weird vibes in a like I don't trust this guy kind of way, and like I don't think that's at all what the movie was trying to do. It was just trying to like seriously be you have both these men that are in different ways trying to get the affection of one woman, and like we're not really supposed to think like if she had chosen Ben, like he would have been a terrible husband or anything. Like we're not supposed to think that, right?
Well, I think just because of how immediately he tries to he has his eye on Sarah with, you kind of maybe get the sense that he's a manipulator.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, he hadn't seen a woman in 6 weeks. I mean,
Yeah, but it's just it's inauthentic, like it's if he's like he doesn't know who she is and he's immediately going for it. Like that's that's obviously like why are you going for this woman? It's just because he's he's been a horn dog, and that's inauthentic.
And as we all know from cinema, horn dogs no good. That's just a fact about storytelling. Yeah, I think when he goes mask off later, we're then in a position to backtrack his previous behavior, and start to put the pieces together. So I think it's also just difficult to view this in the absence of knowing where it goes. Like I struggle to think of my initial reaction to him without thinking of my reaction to where his behavior ends up. Which maybe just means it's sort of continuous and well put together. But the plot contrivance here is that he obviously is interested in Sarah. She's not interested in Ben, but she's clearly more interested in Ralph. And the dynamic that develops is Sarah and Ben are sort of going on these picnics and dates and stuff. Ralph is working, right? He's on the radios. He's maintaining everything. He's keeping himself busy and keeping himself distant from them. And it's only when they all 3 come together to watch news broadcasts from the last few days before the end of the world that Ralph has gathered that things accelerate. Those news broadcasts, by the way, kind of devastating. Like they just sit on it for like a good minute and they just watch you experience like crowds and normal stuff in contrast to where the world is now. And the way this scene escalates and the way the plot kind of escalates toward the conclusion is that Ben basically puts the hard word to Ralph in a pretty crass moment. He kind of is like, look, like one of he's like, one of us will have to have her. And Sarah walks in at the last minute, and she kind of storms out, obviously. And yeah, it's a really awkward moment for a lot of reasons, because it feels like a conversation Ralph would never have because he doesn't think like this. And Ben is trying to be as pragmatic as possible. And so this sort of produces the beginning of a rift between them. Ralph goes back to his place. Sarah comes in and they have a disastrous conversation about their feelings for each other, where he tacitly admits that he loves her, and that's the problem. Because she's like, what's the problem? He's like, well, I love you. Like, that's the problem. And then we can talk a little bit about the kind of escalation with Sarah and Ben and the violence. But those are kind of the big plot beats, is we go from everything being copacetic to, now that the thing has been said out loud, the kind of the race is on, or the clock is now ticking on some resolution having to happen between Sarah and Ralph, or Sarah and Ben, in some direction here, is presumably where we think things are going. So then, big thing at the end. Ben, how do I say this? Ben confronts Sarah, is the only real way to describe what happens, as he sort of begins to spiral. And he sort of grabs her arm, and she's like, don't touch me, don't touch me. And ends up sort of chasing her out of the...
That's a subtle thing from earlier in the film, is when she said that to Ralph as well, and he didn't touch her, whereas this time...
he completely backs off. And this is sort of after he sort of... he doesn't... he doesn't necessarily... He does threaten her, but he does it in a way that is, like, very underhanded. Where he's like, I could force you, like, there'd be no one to stop me. And she goes, well, like, if you did that, you'd be making my choice for me. And this is where, he then follows her outside, and we get that scene of, like, don't touch me, and he grabs her, and he starts kissing her, and it's just vile. Like, he's just kind of forcing himself on her. And she's telling him to do it, but, like, it's just really, really uncomfortable. And this is then what sets him off on this spiral where he goes to Ralph's place with a revolver, and he basically gives it to Ralph, and he says, I see you, like, you're plotting and scheming, you're like some kind of fancy spider, but I'm coming for you. And then we get, the kind of climax of the film, which is Ralph, running through the streets, initially trying to go to Sarah's place, and then, escaping Ben, who was on the roof with the rifle, sort of chasing him down. And as Ralph walks past the Ralph Bunche Park, which is, across from the United Nations building, he reads that passage from Isaiah about, like, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. He throws away his gun, and then the film ostensibly ends with Sarah catching up to Ralph. She takes his hand, and then Ralph seemingly forgives Ben, and they sort of hold hands together and walk home. This conflict between them, in some way, resolved.
Well, wait. Did I just not pay it? I might have just blanked out. But did you mention how Ralph, like, willingly, like, disarms himself, throws away the gun, and gives himself up to the mercy of Ben, who at the last moment decides that he can't kill an unarmed man.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot going on here. I think the biggest thing to bring forward is the obviously this is a film about, like, nuclear fallout and, like, the apocalypse caused by nuclear war. He's in, like, the now it's the Ralph Bunche Park and the character's called Ralph. I think that's just unfortunate. I would have called the character something else. That passage is from Isaiah 2:3, which, is a pretty common passage. Obviously, it's there because it's literally across the road from the United Nations building. If you're standing at the front door of the United Nations building, you're looking at the park, looking at that plaque on the wall. And that plaque on the wall, pretty straightforwardly, is, they shall beat their swords into plowshares, which is to say, disarm your weapons and make them into productive means of society to do things, and their spears into pruning hooks. Pretty straightforward. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Basically, like, it's all about disarmament, and taking those means of destruction and making them into productive means of society, which obviously in the US and around the world, sort of in the decades that follow this, becomes a real pressing point, as nuclear disarmament becomes a pretty big and important thing in the world. My biggest question is, like, what do we think the ending of this film means, or like, what is it saying, and where do we leave these characters? Because it's mighty vague. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, the disarmament theme is pretty salient there, I think, as you've said. If this world was caused by a nuclear apocalypse, then the idea of everyone just stop fighting and save ourselves, save everyone. That's the best solution here. I also think like the moral complexity of Ben is interesting, and that will evolve into like the trope of post-apocalypse characters that make questionable decisions and are morally grey, but only because of their extreme circumstances, kind of thing. Yeah, that's about it. That's about all I got.
I wish that they had done it differently and it had been Ben who sees the words and Ben who throws down his gun, because all Ralph was ever doing was trying to defend himself. And even before that, Ralph had been extremely focused on trying to preserve history, preserve knowledge. So like him seeing the words and needing a reminder that he needs to preserve the knowledge, like that didn't make sense. You needed to have the guy who was causing war be the one to have the realization that I need to stop causing war, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty it's pretty indelible to the UN as like an institution to be like the like, it's like a very morally righteous institution, so it is actually pretty fitting. Like, I know what you're saying, but it's pretty fitting to me to be like, actually, it's the person with the moral high ground who puts down their gun, and teaches the barbarous that actually, war is not the right thing, and peace is the right thing. Feels very much in line with the kind of ideas that inform the United Nations as a institution. I also think it's interesting.
So the Darth director's cut, when Ralph goes and throws his gun down and Ben just says, "Okay, I'm gonna marry your girlfriend," and then shoots him.
Bang. Yeah, exactly. So there's a question here about, there's two things I want to put into the air, which is, where does this ending leave our characters? Like, what do we think happens moving forward? It's probably the first thing, and then I'll talk about the second thing in a second.
Oh, well, they obviously become a throuple.
I would, yes. There's this like amazing music that's going on, this incredibly grandiose symphonic music, and I'm hearing the words like if there was a song sung to this, and it's like, we're going to have a threesome, and they're walking down the middle of the road, all three of them holding hands, and I'm like, they didn't mean this back then, but that's how it looks.
I mean, yeah, it's very obviously because of what you were saying at the beginning, David, about how, as countercultural as this film is, having, an ending where like Sarah and Ralph become a romantically involved was probably too controversial at the time. And so they, in order, incremental baby steps kind of thing, in order to move the line a bit more forward, you have to, you have to play within the rules of your system kind of thing. But like not push it too far.
Yeah. Which is a shame because it really feels like they walk right up to the line and then they step away from it. Like, and she takes his hand. You know, she engages with him. Like it's all there.
Not to bring it back to Star Wars, but a lot of these arguments that we're saying are still true, because like so many fans wanted Rey and Finn to be the romantic couple and are convinced that was initially what the purpose of those characters was, and then like Disney or whoever caved on it and like, no, we can't have the black man and the white woman together. And this was 70 whatever years before, and we're still having the same discussions, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks, capitalism.
I don't think any of the relationships would have worked in that for Rey in that sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
I feel like no matter who the love interest was, it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
He's like, that
That's-
Karen, she's not going to get anybody.
Who
Well, I don't
would it
know.
work
Like,
with?
I just well, that's the thing. Like, I'm not saying like she's Rey is unlovable, but I'm just saying like I don't see it working with Finn. I don't see it working with fucking Oscar Isaac, and it certainly didn't work with Adam Driver. So
It's true. I mean, is Chewbacca single?
yeah.
I'm just saying. Although you shouldn't date dog. You shouldn't date a dog. That seems like a mistake.
Yeah,
Anyway.
actually, I want her to get together with like a non-human alien,
A freak.
like just really, go.
Yeah. Not enough people in Star Wars getting freaky with aliens, you know?
Yeah, I want more interspecies relationships in Star Wars. That's what I want.
Yeah.
So we need a Captain Jack, is what you're saying.
We need a Captain
Yeah,
Jack.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like-
Okay, then the last question I have is the film is called The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. Who is the world and the flesh and the devil?
Well, it seemed like that was the title just describes the three acts of the film, and like the first one is the world ending, the second one is like the introduction of the flesh, quote unquote, meaning the woman, and then the devil being the men fighting over the woman. That's how I took it.
I feel like attributing it to the three characters is pretty crass. Like, it's, is that what is that what the intent was?
No one knows. It's just a really interesting question because I think Darth is probably closer to the thing, which is like it describes the things that happen. But it's you call a film that and you have three characters, it's invariable that someone's going to be like, let me put the schematic onto them and like make it make sense. And I think you can pretty easily, like Ralph is the world, Sarah's the flesh, Ben's the devil. It's not a hard thing to do. It's also the order in which those characters appear. This fucking cinema, like this film theory writes itself. You know what I mean? But what I find interesting is that as a film that is trying to put a lot of these complicated ideas into conversation, it has to end with this, I wouldn't say pacifist approach, but that is truly what the United Nations ends up sort of having as its underlying philosophy. But it has to end with something that is ideologically driven rather than character driven. Like Ralph looks at the thing and that sort of causes him to throw his gun away, as if remembering that like there are greater things than like the material world in this moment. Like, and I need to rise above, or I need to surrender myself, because if I kill this guy, then I'm no better than the people that killed the world type of realization. And I think that's probably like another way that you can read the title of the film, is it's about the contention of like the world and what remains in it, the flesh and what we do with, our time and our lives, and then the devil, which is like the sort of temptation to do evil, the temptation to do harm. And that at the end, Ralph decides not to do that harm, and decides instead to, discard the devil and focus on the world and the flesh type thing.
Yeah, it makes sense for Ralph's character because he is concerned with you know, like the preservation of knowledge, and you know, he's his main motivation and his goal is to find other survivors and to rebuild, you know, the world, kind of thing. You know, he's concerned with um preserving you know, this quote unquote progress of humanity in terms of like their you know, potent ideas, and the what he reads on there, you know, is a very like sort of potent human made idea of um understanding that, you know, war happens, and because, you know, people are impulsive, but like you can also rise above it and, you know, not do a war, kind of thing. And that is, yeah, it's like that's like it's he sees it as bigger than him and bigger than, you know, all three of them, kind of thing, and he's willing to sacrifice himself in order to try and keep that going, keep that idea going.
Right. Yeah, and like that's, you know, it's tragic is not the right word, but there's a like a I think in a different film this would be a really potent sort of piece of imagery. But I think in not doing the ending, like in not having Ralph and Sarah actually get together, I think it's blunted a little bit and comes across can come across, I think, or it did for me, as a little bit saccharine, or sort of not an easy out, but it, yeah, I felt like it didn't fully resolve the things it set out to resolve, because it didn't actually take it the full length of where it wanted to go, which was like actually in surrendering and refusing to do violence. He is sort of freeing himself from the constraints and the violence that society has impressed upon him as a black man, and he's free to relieve himself of those mediations, and those things that he has had to do to survive. You know, that that respectability politics is no longer something he needs, and he can actually be honest and authentic with Sarah and be with Sarah. But we don't get that. We get right up to that line and we step back. And I think that's where I tend to align with some of the critics that are like, it doesn't go too far. Not necessarily because it's not progressive enough, but it doesn't actually stick the themes it's setting up, because it doesn't do the ending that it's set up. Also, it is also not as progressive as we want it to be, but it's the 59. Like I get it. Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, that's the film, folks. Any final thoughts on The World, the Flesh, and the Devil?
Well, just when they start hunting each other, and there's a couple shots of Sarah like walking through the city, like, oh, where are you guys? And I was like, oh no.
Yeah, I did have that thought. Yeah, that was like the same thought I had when Dex was like leveling the rifle at the dance, and I was like, oh my god, is Heather gonna get shot? It was the same vibe.
She should have taken her out. It would have devastated us all.
Should have packed more than one bullet, Dex. You know,
He only ever needs one.
it's true.
Yeah, one shot, one kill.
One shot, one kill, baby. All right, that will do it for our episode on the sort of kicking off the post-apocalypse unit. We will be back next time to talk about Station 11. So we'll be kicking off our coverage of the TV show. We'll be talking about episodes 1 and 2. This will be seamless for you listening or watching in the feed, but we will be having a month off as I'll be out of the country. And Station 11, if you're interested, it's worth dipping into the book. I think if you haven't touched either, I would just start with the show. And as we get through, we'll talk a little bit about the book and perhaps some of the adaptation choices, and in particular, some choices around the way that story progresses and then wraps up, I think are really, really compelling. And I'll be bringing lots of other Emily St. John Mandel into conversation with that, as sort of that preeminent specialist in the sort of pandemic novel, as far as The End of the World is concerned. So, yeah, look forward to that. Definitely watch ahead if you are someone who likes to watch along. Otherwise, Patrick, if people want to find you on the internet, where's the best place for them to do that?
You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We have a website, amttm.com. Actually, just got redesigned by.
Ooh, I didn't see that yet.
Thank you, Mitchie. Yeah, he went proper web dev and like coded it himself. So there you go.
Oh, it looks good.
Yeah, it looks very.
Now we just need to record something this year.
So, yeah. So yeah, find us there if you like this content, this sort of content.
Darth, what about you?
I just realized that I'm at a disadvantage because my computer is all the way over there. If I ever need to look up something
Yeah,
while
dude.
we're recording, I guess it's a way of getting me out of extra work. Oh, I can't look that up for you right now.
Google it for me.
Oh no. YouTube, DARTH''D, doing typically Star Wars stuff, but my goal is to branch out a whole lot more. I want to start tying in a lot more post-apocalyptic stuff, even outside of what we're talking about, and figure out how to bring that into this channel as well, because I do love the topic so much. And I will finish another video shortly. I'm giving myself one more day to film post-apocalyptic scenes, because there will be an awesome trailer that David will put together. And I have been filming a lot and trudging through creeks and crawling up pretend mountains, and yeah.
He's been loving it.
My body's in pain.
Yeah. Yes, all of that will be linked in the show notes. Down below, if you made it this far, you already know what it is. zeroindent.com for everything we do. You can support us at patreon.com/zeroindent. This takes a lot of work to put together the behind the scenes, and we love doing it. And if you sign up at patreon.com/zeroindent, you can get access to the Zero Indent bonus episodes. Our next bonus episode will be about Tony Gilroy's Michael Clayton. That'll probably be on the next side of when I'm back from holidays, but look forward to that. We'll be chopping it up and talking through one of our favorite writers and directors. Obviously, the impetus for that was Andor Season 2, and Michael Clayton's a really good freaking film, and I'm very excited to talk about it with you guys because no one has heard of this film. Not ready. Yeah.
Not ready to let go of Tony Gilroy just yet.
No. Not yet, Patrick. Not yet. Now, I have been workshopping an outro for this, because obviously with a new unit, we need a new outro. So I'm curious to see what you guys think. Typically, it is related to the show, but because this is a unit about genre, I had to kind of come up with something a bit pithier and broader. This is what I had in mind. Let me should feedback, better suggestions, okay? So, I would do the outro and it'd be like, if you're watching or listening, make sure you leave a comment, like, subscribe, all those good things. It helps other people find us. I say the thing about, like, send it to someone that you think would like it. And then I go, that's it for now. We'll catch you guys next time. And as always, it's just the end of the show. It's not the end of the world.
Beautiful. Oh, I like that.
Is it good?
I love that.
Okay. All right. Done. Sold. There you go. Well, if you're watching this, like, comment, subscribe, send it to someone that you think might enjoy it. Truly, if you're listening to this on your podcast catcher of choice or on YouTube, leaving a review or a comment helps more people find us. And if you're on social media, even if you have a small following, share us, let people know that you enjoy it. Those 10 or 12 people in your orbit are going to be interested in what you recommend to them. Makes a difference for us. Otherwise, we appreciate the heck out of you watching or listening. We will catch you next time to talk about Station 11, episodes 1 and 2. And as always, it's just the end of the show. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, I do like that. Zero Indent is an independent publication dedicated to studying works of genre fiction, brought to you by our subscribers. Head to patreon.com/zeroindent to learn more and consider supporting us. Our theme song is The Swan by Alon Peretz. Our podcast cover art is by Crystal Hatay. Everything else is written, directed, and edited by me, DC McNeil. You can find our merch and books at underink.press and everything we do at zeroindent.com.